Hello everyone, I'm the Dark Hour storyteller, and tonight, we're delving into something that will tug at your heartstrings and chill you to the bone. This isn't just a story, it's a tapestry woven from the quiet fears and forgotten secrets of a place called Willow Creek. Before we journey into the shadows of this town, take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments. What's a hidden secret your town might be holding on to? Get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let the whispers begin. The scent of lake water and lilies used to bring me peace, until the day I pulled something from its depths that shattered my quiet grief. It was a tarnished silver locket, and inside, a faded photograph of a girl who looked too much like my lost sister taken decades ago. My name is Alara, and for the past 5 years Willow Creek Lake has been both my sanctuary and my tormentor. I came back here to this picturesque but isolated town, after my younger sister Lily vanished without a trace from its very shores. She was just 16, full of life, and then, gone. The lake never gave her back, and neither did the town. Willow Creek, with its quaint charm and serene waters, held an unspoken sadness, a collective holding of breath, especially when it came to Lily's unsolved disappearance. I could feel the town's avoidance, a palpable hush that descended whenever her name was even whispered. It was as if acknowledging her absence was too painful, or perhaps too revealing. I'm an artist, or at least I used to be. Now, my days are mostly spent in a haze of unresolved grief, sketching the ever-changing surface of the lake, hoping to find some answers in its depths, or perhaps just a whisper of the sister I lost. Each ripple felt like a question, each shifting shadow a taunt. It was during one of these routine visits, a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs heavy and the air is thick with the buzzing of insects, that I found it. I was sitting on the worn wooden dock, dipping my fingers into the cool water when something caught my eye. Tangled in a cluster of reeds near the shore, shimmering faintly beneath the surface, was a glint of metal. Curious, I leaned over, my arms stretching, and my fingers closed around something small and cold. I pulled it out, and as the lake water streamed off it, I saw it was a locket, tarnished silver, clearly very old. My thumb brushed away a thin layer of grime, revealing intricate, almost forgotten etchings of wildflowers on its surface. But it was what was inside that truly stopped my breath. With a soft click, it sprang open, revealing a faded, sepia-toned photograph. It was a girl no older than Lily, with wide, earnest eyes and a faint, almost shy smile. Her hair was pulled back, a ribbon tied at the nape of her neck. And her eyes, they were Lily's eyes. The same shape, the same spark, a startling, unsettling resemblance that sent a shiver down my spine despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. This photo was taken decades ago by the look of it, but the familiarity was undeniable. My fingers trembled as I turned the locket over. Faintly etched into the back, almost worn away by time, were 2 initials, SM. And below them, a date, August 12, 1978. My mind raced. August 12, 1978. That was years before I was even born, decades before Lily existed. Yet, the girl in the photo, it was uncanny. What was this locket doing here, at the very spot where my sister had vanished? It felt less like a coincidence and more like a sign, a cold, metallic piece of a puzzle I didn't even know existed until now. My quiet grief, for the first time in 5 years, felt violently interrupted, replaced by a sudden, terrifying, and utterly consuming curiosity. I couldn't shake the locket's unsettling presence. It pulsed with a silent question, an echo from a time before me, before Lily. My first instinct was to show it to Mark, my oldest friend in Willow Creek. Mark and I had grown up together, navigating the quiet streets and echoing woods of this town. Now in his 30s, he was a history enthusiast with a knack for local lore and an almost encyclopedic memory for Willow Creek's past. If anyone could connect this strange locket to something real, it was him. I found him at his usual spot, the small, cluttered back room of his antique shop, surrounded by forgotten relics. I laid the locket on his dusty workbench, the silver glinting dully under the dim light. "Look at this, Mark," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. He picked it up, turning it over in his calloused fingers. His brow furrowed as he saw the faded photograph and then the etched initials and date. SM, August 12, 1978, he mumbled, mostly to himself. "Interesting find, Alara. Probably just something lost generations ago. Old lake, old town, things wash up." He handed it back, his gaze lingering on the photo for a moment, but then he shrugged, dismissing it with a casualness that both frustrated and calmed me. "A coincidence, that's all. Don't go conjuring ghosts where there aren't any, especially not now." He was trying to protect me, I knew, from chasing shadows, from falling deeper into the abyss of Lily's disappearance. But this felt different. This felt like a tangible thread pulling me towards something, some truth. His dismissal, however well-intentioned, only solidified my resolve. If Mark wouldn't help, I'd have to investigate on my own. I started subtly, armed with only the initials SM and that chilling date. My first stop was the local library, a place I usually avoided, filled with the hushed whispers of forgotten stories. I spent hours hunched over the microfiche reader, its hum a hypnotic drone in the quiet room, scrolling through decades of Willow Creek's local newspapers. My eyes blurred, scanning endless columns of mundane news, local gossip, and faded advertisements. Then, almost buried between an article about a bumper crop of apples and a notice for a bake sale, I found it. A brief, almost overlooked clipping from late August 1978. The headline was small, devoid of sensationalism, "Local Girl Missing." The article stated that a Sarah Miller, age 17, had vanished without a trace near Willow Creek Lake on August 12, 1978. My breath hitched. The date. The initials. It all matched. Sarah Miller. She wasn't just a faded face in a locket, she was real. And she too had disappeared from the lake. The hair on my arm stood on end. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern. From that day on, Willow Creek, once a place of melancholic comfort, began to shift, to reveal a hidden layer of unease. The strange occurrences started subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. When I was by the lake, sketching, I'd catch fleeting shadows at the edge of my vision, just beyond the tree line, too swift to be real, too persistent to be ignored. Sometimes, when the wind picked up, I'd hear faint whispers carried on the breeze, just at the edge of audibility, like hushed conversations just out of reach. I'd strain to listen, but they'd always fade, leaving me alone with the rustle of leaves and the lapping of water. Then there was the radio. An old, dusty transistor radio I kept in Lily's room, a relic from her childhood. It hadn't worked in years, even after countless attempts to fix it. Yet, on several occasions, I'd walk past Lily's open door and hear it faintly crackling to life. And always it was her favorite song, an obscure indie track she'd been obsessed with in her last year, playing softly as if on repeat. Each time I'd rush in, my heart pounding, only to find the radio silent, dead again, the room filled with an unyielding quiet. Was it my mind playing tricks? Or was Lily trying to tell me something, to warn me? My grief for Lily, a raw, open wound, was now inextricably intertwined with a growing sense of responsibility for Sarah Miller. Their stories, separated by decades, felt connected, two threads pulled taut by some unseen force. I felt a resonance with Sarah, a desperate kinship born of shared tragedy. It was as if Sarah's voice, through the locket, was reaching out from the past, begging to be heard, not just for herself, but for all the others who had disappeared into the lake's silent depths. I had to know. For Sarah. For Lily. For myself. One evening, as dusk bled across the sky, painting the lake in shades of bruised purple and gray, I found myself back on the old dock, the silver locket warm against my skin. The air grew still, the usual evening chirping of crickets strangely absent. A profound quiet settled over the water, so deep it felt unnatural. I was lost in thought, tracing the faint initials on the locket, when I felt it, a distinct, utterly cold touch on my arm, like an icy hand brushing against my skin, sending a jolt through me. My breath hitched. I whipped around, my heart hammering against my ribs, but there was nothing there. Only the deepening twilight and the silent, dark water. Yet, the locket, which had been warm from my body heat, now felt impossibly cold, as if it had just been plunged into an Arctic stream. And then, in the glassy surface of the lake, directly in front of me, a single perfect ripple appeared, expanding outwards in a silent circle, even though there was no breeze, no stone dropped, nothing to disturb the water. It was as if something unseen had just surfaced, or was about to. The lake wasn't just a grave, it was a memory stirring awake. They say the woods around Willow Creek hold secrets deeper than any root system. But I never knew those secrets could whisper back, especially not in the voice of a lonely, forgotten old man. The name Old Man Hemlock was spoken in hushed tones in Willow Creek, usually accompanied by a dismissive wave or a knowing glance. He was a recluse, an octogenarian phantom who lived in a ramshackle cabin on the very edge of what locals called the Whispering Woods. This wasn't just any forest, it was ancient, dense, and unervingly quiet, rarely ventured into by anyone other than the most seasoned hunters. Tales of disorientation and strange, unidentifiable noises echoing through its depths kept most people away. Hemlock, in his youth, had seen Sarah Miller disappear, and he'd been a fixture of the town's periphery ever since, known for his strange, rambling pronouncements and an almost pathological fear of the lake. He was practically a legend, a warning in human form. Driven by the unsettling revelations of the locket and the newspaper clipping, and fueled by the growing conviction that Lily's fate was tied to Sarah Miller's, I knew I had to speak to him. He was the last living link to that distant past, a keeper of unspoken truths. The idea terrified me, but the alternative, living in perpetual, agonizing uncertainty, was far worse. The path to his cabin was barely a deer trail, overgrown with thorny bushes and shrouded by the thick canopy of ancient pines. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the deeper I ventured. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked less like a home and more like something the woods had swallowed, half hidden by vines and leaning precariously. A thin wisp of smoke curled from its crooked chimney, the only sign of life. I knocked on the warped wooden door, a hesitant rap that seemed swallowed by the vast silence of the woods. After a long moment, the door creaked open just an inch, revealing a sliver of darkness and a single rheumy eye. "What do you want?" a raspy voice rasped, laced with suspicion. "Mr. Hemlock? My name is Alara. I need to ask you about something from a long time ago." The door opened a fraction wider, and old man Hemlock emerged, a gaunt figure, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes clouded but sharp. He clutched a gnarled walking stick, looking like a part of the woods itself. He certainly didn't look like someone who welcomed visitors. He looked like someone who had seen too much. He looked like someone who knew too much. "Willow Creek has nothing to say about the past," he muttered, his gaze darting nervously towards the dense trees behind me. "The past is best left buried. The lake hungers for silence." His words, cryptic as they were, sent a fresh wave of unease through me. This was exactly what I'd expected, and yet, hearing them spoken aloud by this spectral figure in his isolated cabin was far more chilling than I'd anticipated. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found this, Mr. Hemlock." I held out the silver locket, letting it catch the dim light. His eyes, which had been wary, widened in something akin to pure fear as they fixed on the tarnished silver. He recoiled slightly as if burned. Where did you get that?" His voice was barely a whisper now. "The lake. Near the old dock," I explained gently. "It belonged to a girl named Sarah Miller. August 12, 1978. Do you remember her?" His hand trembled as he reached out, his fingers hovering above the locket but not quite touching it. "Sarah." He breathed, the name a ghost in the air. "They silenced her. Like the others. The lake, it always takes. It's the pact. The others, they watch." He seemed to be speaking more to himself than to me, his gaze distant, lost in some horrifying memory. "The pact? What pact?" I pressed, my voice barely a whisper. "And who are the others?" Hemlock's eyes snapped back to me, filled with a sudden, desperate agitation. "Leave the sleeping things alone, girl. You stir what's best left buried. It always starts with a mirror. They watch through the glass. They mark their chosen. Sarah, she knew too much. Her friend Claire, she ran. The only one smart enough to run." He seemed to shrink into himself, his body trembling. "You remind me of them. Don't be next. Leave Willow Creek, Alara. Before it's too late." He stumbled back inside his cabin, pulling the door shut with a finality that echoed in the heavy silence of the woods, leaving me alone with his chilling words. "It always starts with a mirror." His rambling words, though disjointed, provided a new lead. Claire, Sarah's best friend. She had run. What did she know? I spent the next few days in a frantic search, poring over old yearbooks, town registers, anything that might give me a clue to Claire's whereabouts. It was a tedious, painstaking process, but eventually, after countless dead ends, I found it. A distant relative listed in an old funeral program who had a modern contact number. I sent a hesitant text, hoping for a reply, praying for a connection. Meanwhile, old man Hemlock's parting words about mirrors began to haunt me. They weren't just a part of his ramblings. They felt like a personal warning. My own home, once my sanctuary, began to feel unsettling. Objects in my living room would be subtly rearranged when I left the house. Not enough for a break-in, just enough to be unsettling. A book moved from one shelf to another, a coffee cup shifted inches from where I'd left it. It was tiny, almost imperceptible, but it chipped away at my sense of security. And the mirrors, every time I caught my reflection, it seemed to linger slightly, to hold my gaze a fraction of a second longer than it should. My own eyes, looking back at me, seemed to carry a strange, quiet knowing, a deep sadness that wasn't entirely my own. I was reaching for my phone to try Claire's number again, standing in front of the ornate antique mirror in my hallway, when my reflection seemed to ripple. Just a flicker, but it was there, like water distorting glass. My heart leapt into my throat. The image in the mirror shifted, a fleeting, dark form passing behind my reflected self, even though there was nothing but a blank wall behind me in reality. I screamed, stepping back, bumping hard against the wall. When I dared to look again, the mirror was still, my reflection ordinary, though my face was pale with terror. The mirrors weren't just reflections. They were gateways, and something was trying to cross. Old Man Hemlock's eyes, clouded with age but sharp with a deep-seated paranoia, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He was initially hostile, a gnarled sentinel guarding the secrets of the Whispering Woods. "What do you want?" he rasped, his voice as dry as autumn leaves. He clutched his walking stick like a weapon, his body language speaking of years spent fending off intruders, real or imagined. The air around him felt heavy, imbued with the weight of unseen burdens. I pushed back the knot of fear in my stomach, drawing on a well of empathy born from my own raw grief. "Mr. Hemlock," I began, my voice soft but steady, "my name is Alara. I'm Lily Thompson's sister. I found something by the lake, something old. I think it belonged to someone named Sarah Miller." Slowly, deliberately, I held out the tarnished silver locket, letting the faint light filter through the trees catch its worn surface. His gaze snapped to the locket, and in that instant, his hostility fractured, replaced by an unmistakable terror. His eyes, already wide, seemed to stretch, revealing the whites all around. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat, a mix of fear and recognition. He leaned in, his breath ragged, staring at the locket as if it were a venomous snake. "Sarah," he whispered, the name a chilling breath on the quiet air. "They silenced her. Like the others. The lake, it always takes the pact. The others, they watch." His voice was barely audible, a disjointed mumble of dread. He wasn't speaking to me, not really. He was speaking to the shadows, to the past, reliving something unspeakable. "What pact, Mr. Hemlock?" I urged, my voice gentle, pulling him back to the present. "Who are the others? What happened to Sarah?" He flinched as if my questions were physical blows. His agitation visibly mounted, his hands trembling on his walking stick. "Leave the sleeping things alone, girl," he suddenly snapped, his voice rising, laced with desperate urgency. "You stir what's best left buried. It always starts with a mirror. They watch through the glass. They mark their chosen. Sarah, she knew too much. Her friend Claire, she ran. The only one smart enough to run." He seemed to shrink further into himself, his fear consuming him. "You remind me of them. Don't be next. Leave Willow Creek, Alara, before it's too late." He turned abruptly, retreating into the darkness of his cabin, the door creaking shut behind him, leaving me alone in the oppressive quiet of the woods. But just as the door closed, a final, ragged whisper drifted out to me, carried on the damp air. "It always starts with a mirror." His words, fragmented and fraught with paranoia, echoed in my mind as I stumbled back through the woods. Claire. Sarah Miller's best friend. The only one smart enough to run. A desperate hope ignited within me. Claire ran, she must know why. She must know something. I spent the next few days in a relentless search, poring over old town records, scanning dusty high school yearbooks, and painstakingly sifting through online social media archives, searching for any trace of a Claire connected to Sarah Miller from Willow Creek in the late 70s. It was a tedious, mind-numbing process, but my need to know, to connect these disparate threads, was relentless. Finally, after countless dead ends and near misses, I found a distant relative of Sarah's, an elderly cousin who had kept in touch with Claire for years. Through this tenuous link, I managed to get a contact number. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. As I waited for Claire to respond, the strange occurrences Hemlock had hinted at intensified, slowly eroding the boundaries of my rational world. Objects in my home were subtly, unnervingly rearranged. A book I'd left on my nightstand would be on the floor the next morning. A mug I'd used for tea would be in the wrong cupboard. It wasn't a break-in, nothing was stolen, nothing damaged. It was just displacement. As if someone or something was moving through my space, asserting its presence. And then there were the mirrors. Hemlock's chilling whisper, "It always starts with a mirror," haunted my every reflection. I found myself avoiding them or approaching them with a creeping dread. But sometimes I couldn't escape it. I'd catch my own image, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, my reflection would seem to linger, to hold my gaze a fraction of a second longer than it should. My eyes, looking back at me, seemed to carry a strange, quiet knowing, a deep sadness that wasn't entirely my own. Other times, the glass would seem to shimmer, as if ripples were running across its surface, distorting my features for just an instant before settling back into a flat, unnerving stillness. It felt like a subtle violation, a breach of a sacred space. My grief for Lily, which had been a heavy, constant companion for 5 years, was now inextricably intertwined with a growing sense of responsibility for Sarah Miller. Their stories, separated by decades, felt connected, two threads pulled taut by some unseen force. I felt a desperate kinship with Sarah, a resonance born of shared tragedy. It was as if Sarah's voice, through the locket, was reaching out from the past, begging to be heard not just for herself, but for all the others who had disappeared into the lake's silent depths. My sorrow had become a burning need to find answers, to uncover the truth, fueled now by a growing, cold dread that whispered of something far more sinister than simple disappearances. I was standing in front of my antique dressing table mirror, trying to gather my composure, when my phone, clutched tight in my hand, buzzed violently. It was an unknown number, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello," I whispered, my voice trembling. A static-filled gasp answered me, followed by a voice, thin and reedy with terror. "Alara? Is this Alara?" It was Claire. My heart leaped, but the relief was immediately overtaken by a crushing wave of fear. Her voice was frantic, breathless, as if she were running. "They're still here, Alara. They never left. The ritual, the mirrors, you have to stop them. They're coming for you too." Then, with a sickening pop and crackle, the line went dead. A cold dread, like an icy hand, squeezed my chest. "They." Claire's terrified voice confirmed my deepest fears. It wasn't just a locket or old clippings or a madman's ramblings. They referred to something real, something sinister. Something that had taken Sarah and Lily and was now reaching for me. The truth wasn't just hidden in old newspapers or whispered by madmen. It was etched into the very foundations of Willow Creek, a horrifying pact its founders made, and its current residents perpetuated through silence. Claire's frantic, broken call had been the final, terrifying confirmation. My fears weren't figments of grief or paranoia. Something real, something ancient, was preying on Willow Creek, and it had taken Lily. That chilling realization, instead of breaking me, solidified my resolve. I had to expose this, but I couldn't do it alone. My first stop was Mark. He'd been skeptical before, but the accumulating strangeness, my increasingly unhinged demeanor, the way I spoke of shadows and whispers, and most of all, the palpable terror in my eyes, had finally chipped away at his historian's detachment. He found me hunched over my laptop, staring at the static contact information for Claire, looking utterly defeated. "Ilara," he said softly, his voice laced with genuine concern. "You're scaring me. What's going on?" I looked up, my eyes bloodshot, and recounted everything. The locket, Sarah Miller, Old Man Hemlock's cryptic warnings, and Claire's terrifying call. I saw the shift in his expression, from concern to a dawning horror. The easy skepticism he usually wore had finally cracked. "A pact?" he murmured, stroking his chin, his mind already churning through historical possibilities. "Mirrors? This isn't just a ghost story, is it?" He shook his head, a grim determination setting in. "All right, let's dig deeper. If there's a secret in this town, it's written down somewhere. History is rarely silent, even when people are." We started by focusing on Willow Creek's founding history, going beyond the pleasant narratives found in tourist brochures. We spent days buried in the dusty archives of the county courthouse, sifting through forgotten deeds, land grants, and most importantly, the crumbling, leather-bound town council minutes from the late 1800s. It was tedious work, filled with mundane entries about livestock and property disputes, but Mark's historical eye was keen. He spotted subtle anomalies, gaps, and oddly worded entries. Then, in a particularly obscure, almost illegible journal penned by one of Willow Creek's earliest settlers, Elias Thorne, we found it. The handwriting was cramped and erratic, growing increasingly desperate as the entries progressed. It spoke of a devastating blight that had swept through the valley, threatening to destroy all of Willow Creek's crops. Starvation was imminent. The desperation was palpable in Thorne's crude script. And then a chilling shift in tone. References to the Great Hunger, a whispering presence from the deep, and the desperate bargain. They, the desperate group of founders, had made a pact. With something ancient, something unspeakable, residing in the very lake that now defined their town. An entity that demanded sustenance in exchange for warding off the blight, for ensuring the town's prosperity. It wasn't crops or gold or livestock. The tribute was far more insidious. It was a cycle of disappearances. Always young, always innocent, always taken near the lake. Roughly every generation, a new tribute was required to appease the entity, to maintain Willow Creek's unnatural prosperity. Thorne's journal detailed a rudimentary ritual, a dark invocation where mirrors were used to mark the chosen individual, to draw the entity's attention, preparing the way for the next sacrifice. The words made my stomach churn, a cold sickness spreading through me. The subsequent town council minutes, read with this horrifying new lens, confirmed it. There were veiled discussions, coded language about maintaining the balance, and upholding the old agreements. The town elders, generation after generation, had kept the secret. They passed it down, ensuring compliance not just through threats, but through a terrifying, twisted sense of survival. They believed that if the pact was broken, the blight would return, or worse, the entity would claim them all. Lily wasn't just a missing girl. She was the latest in a long line of innocent victims, sacrificed to maintain Willow Creek's quiet existence. My grief for Lily now burned with an incandescent rage. My sweet, innocent sister, thrown to the wolves, or rather to the lake, by the very town she lived in. The town's silence wasn't just avoidance, it was complicity. Mark, too, was visibly shaken. He sat there, staring at the old journals, his face pale. "My ancestors," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They knew. They were part of this." The historical detachment was gone, replaced by a deep, personal shame and inherited guilt. As the truth solidified, so did the danger. The entity, its ancient pact threatened by our digging, grew more aggressive. The subtle whispers around me turned into menacing, guttural voices, just at the edge of hearing, always when I was alone. My reflection in mirrors didn't just linger. It distorted, my features elongating, eyes blackening for a terrifying instant before snapping back to normal. The shadows I'd seen by the lake now felt like active pursuit, darting in my periphery. Mark and I found subtle signs of intrusion in our homes. Windows slightly ajar, rearranged objects, but never anything stolen. It was a warning. A chilling reminder that they were watching. Old Man Hemlock, his paranoia now replaced by a desperate, fleeting lucidity, sought me out. He appeared at my door, a shivering, skeletal figure clutching a faded, worn book. "Lily," he rasped, his eyes wide. "She found it. The little one, she found this." He thrust a small, childlike journal into my hands, its cover adorned with crude drawings of flowers and a smiling sun. "She disturbed it, Alara. She didn't know. The ritual. She wanted to see the shiny lady in the lake. She thought it was a game." He pointed a trembling finger at an entry. "The mirror showed her a secret. She was trying to tell you." My fingers fumbled open the journal. Inside, among Lily's innocent scribbles and drawings of mermaids, were crude, disturbing sketches of distorted reflections, of a dark, looming figure in the water, and small, shaky notes about the shiny lady in the lake, and making her sad. And then a chilling, final entry, written in Lily's familiar, childish hand. "The mirror showed me a secret." My blood ran cold. Lily, in her innocence, had found an old journal or perhaps stumbled upon a ritual site, inadvertently triggering something ancient, something that had marked her as the next tribute. Her disappearance wasn't random. It was the culmination of a generations-long horror. The silence of Willow Creek wasn't just a tragedy, it was a horrifying conspiracy. The real monsters weren't lurking in the shadows. They were the silence, the fear, and the forgotten choices of an entire town. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Lily wasn't just a victim of a random, tragic disappearance. She was a tribute, the latest in a long, horrifying line. The discovery of Thorne's journal, Lily's own innocent scribbles, the chilling connection to Sarah Miller, it all pointed to an unspeakable truth. My sweet, vibrant Lily had been delivered to a hungry, ancient entity by the very town she called home. The town's silence wasn't just avoidance, a polite reluctance to speak of tragedy, it was active complicity. Every resident who knew, every generation that turned a blind eye, every whispered fear that kept them quiet, was part of the pact that stole away the young. My grief, once a dull ache, now burned with a furious, righteous anger. How could they? How could an entire community sacrifice its children for a false sense of security, for a prosperity built on stolen lives? Beside me, Mark sat slumped, the historical documents scattered around him like damning evidence. His face was pale, etched with a profound sense of betrayal and inherited guilt. He, a proud descendant of Willow Creek's founding families, now faced the horrifying truth. His own ancestors were not pioneering heroes, but architects of a monstrous bargain. "My family," he choked out, running a hand through his hair. "All those stories, the prosperity, the resilience, it was all a lie, built on blood." The weight of generations of secrets pressed down on him, and I saw the internal struggle, the fight between a lifetime of loyalty to his hometown and the undeniable horror of its past. We knew we had to confront them, the townspeople, especially those whose family names resonated in the old journals, the descendants of the original founders. Our first attempt was with Mrs. Gable, a stoic woman in her 70s, whose family had been in Willow Creek for centuries. She listened to our frantic recounting, her face unreadable. When I showed her the locket, the journal, the copies of the old town minutes, her eyes flickered with something akin to fear, but her response was immediate denial. "Nonsense," she stated, her voice flat. "Old superstitions. Willow Creek has always been blessed, nothing more. You're unearthing things best left buried, Alara. There are consequences." Her veiled threat hung in the air, cold and clear. Others we approached reacted similarly. Some offered weak smiles and changed the subject. Some became visibly agitated, their eyes darting around as if expecting to be overheard. A few, like Mr. Henderson, whose family owned the local mill, were overtly hostile. "You don't understand what you're meddling with, young woman," he snarled, his voice low and menacing. "This town has always had its ways. You break the pact, you condemn us all." The fear was palpable in their eyes, a deep-seated terror that overshadowed any flicker of shame or remorse. It was clear, they were complicit out of terror, not malice, convinced that their silence ensured their survival. As we pushed for answers, disturbing the fragile peace Willow Creek had constructed, the entity responded. Its presence, once subtle, grew more aggressive. The fleeting shadows I'd seen by the lake now elongated, stretching into grotesque, almost tangible forms that seemed to stalk us through the dense woods and even down the town's quiet streets. When I was alone in my home, the faint whispers on the wind twisted into menacing voices, guttural and ancient, just at the edge of my hearing, speaking in a language I didn't understand but felt in my bones. My reflection in mirrors, already a source of dread, began to distort violently. Faces would warp into grotesque caricatures, eyes would sink into shadowed hollows, features elongating into something monstrous before snapping back to normal. It was a clear, terrifying message. We were seen, we were marked. Our homes became targets of its subtle wrath. Objects didn't just move, small, unsettling acts of tampering occurred. Books would be ripped, pages torn out. Water would be left running in the sink, almost overflowing. Doors would be left ajar when we swore we'd locked them. It was a psychological war designed to make us doubt our sanity, to make us feel utterly vulnerable and alone. It was during one such night, after I'd found a chilling drawing of a shadowy figure in Lily's journal that mirrored the distorted reflection I'd seen, that old man Hemlock appeared at my door again. He was barely coherent, trembling uncontrollably, his eyes wide and unfocused. His usual paranoia was amplified, but now directed not at me, but at an unseen terror. "It's angry," he rasped, clutching a tattered, ancient piece of parchment to his chest. "You've woken it. She woke it too, the little one. She found this." He thrust the parchment into my hands. It was a crude map showing the layout of Willow Creek, with a distinct X over the old, abandoned town hall. "The mirror," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the X. "It's there. The big one. The central focal point. She found an old book there, describing the ritual. She was playing didn't know. Just like me. I saw it the last time. The mirror, it showed her the path to the lake. She triggered it." He sank to his knees, utterly defeated, muttering about Lily's innocence and the devastating mistake she'd made in her curiosity. His words were a final, agonizing confirmation. Lily, in her innocence, had not been a random victim. She had found a piece of the puzzle, a forgotten book detailing parts of the ritual, perhaps even the location of the central mirror. In her playful curiosity, she had inadvertently marked herself, becoming the latest tribute, unknowingly sacrificing herself to a town that had long ago surrendered its moral compass for survival. The fragmented words from Old Man Hemlock, coupled with the chilling confirmation from Claire, solidified an unbearable truth in my mind. It wasn't just a creature of myth or a vengeful spirit we were up against. The entity's power was intrinsically linked to the town's belief and its collective silence. Every generation that turned a blind eye, every fearful whisper that stayed just a whisper, every secret kept to maintain a fragile peace, fed its hunger. To break this horrifying cycle, to truly sever the connection, we couldn't just fight a monster. We had to expose the very foundation of Willow Creek's deceit. We had to shatter the silence that had swallowed so many, including my own sister. The grim realization settled over me. The entity wasn't a force outside the town, but a festering wound within its very soul, sustained by the fear and complicity of its inhabitants. And the warnings from the townspeople, the veiled threats about condemning us all, if the pact was broken, suddenly made terrifying sense. They weren't just protecting a secret, they were feeding a beast, genuinely believing that their continued silence was the only way to ensure their own survival. This wasn't just a quest for answers anymore, it was a desperate battle for the soul of Willow Creek, a fight to reclaim its future from a past steeped in blood and fear. But time was running out. The aggressive manifestations, the distorted reflections, the whispers turning into menacing voices, these weren't random acts of terror. They were signs. The entity was growing stronger, its influence spreading as we pushed closer to the truth. And it meant that the next tribute was already being subtly marked. Every shiver down my spine, every strange flicker in the corner of my eye, was a reminder that the cycle was preparing to repeat. We had to act, and soon. As Mark and I pieced together the fragments of the puzzle, a desperate thought gnawed at me. What if Lily herself had stumbled upon something even before her disappearance? What if her innocent curiosity had inadvertently sealed her fate? I remembered the obscure transistor radio playing her favorite song, the way it had seemed to turn on by itself in her room. And then there was Old Man Hemlock's last terrified confession, that Lily had found an old book and triggered it. Driven by a surge of desperate hope and chilling dread, I returned to Lily's room. It was still untouched, a time capsule of a life abruptly ended. I ran my hands over her books, her cluttered desk, the worn teddy bear on her bed. Where would a curious, imaginative 16-year-old hide something truly important? I remembered her habit of stashing secrets in plain sight, often tucked away in unexpected places. I began to search, methodically, my fingers tracing familiar contours, memories of her laughter a phantom echo in the quiet room. Behind a loose baseboard in her closet, tucked deep within a forgotten shoebox filled with childhood trinkets, I found it. A small, well-worn journal. Its cover was a pale blue, adorned with childlike drawings of flowers and a naive, smiling sun. My heart pounded as I opened it, recognizing Lily's distinctive, bubbly handwriting. It started innocently enough, entries about school crushes and silly dreams. But then the tone shifted. The handwriting became more hurried, the drawings more abstract, more unsettling. There were crude sketches of a shimmering figure, elongated and vague, which she'd labeled the shiny lady in the lake. Alongside, scribbled notes about making her sad, or trying to talk to her. My breath hitched. It was clear Lily had been drawn to the lake's hidden power, perhaps seeing the entity in some distorted, innocent form. She might have thought it was a magical friend, a secret playmate. She wrote about exploring the abandoned town hall, venturing into parts of Willow Creek no child should. And then, near the end, a series of frantic, almost illegible entries. Drawings of grotesque, shifting faces, reflections distorted beyond recognition. And the chilling, final entry written larger than the rest, underlined multiple times, its childish script now imbued with an adult terror. The mirror showed me a secret. This was it. Lily, in her innocence, had indeed found an old book, likely in the abandoned town hall, describing parts of the ritual. She had discovered the central mirror, the focal point Old Man Hemlock had spoken of. And in her playful curiosity, perhaps trying to make the shiny lady happy, she had looked into it, inadvertently performing a part of the ritual, unknowingly marking herself as the next target. My sister wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She had stumbled into a generations-old nightmare, a legacy of fear and sacrifice, and her pure, innocent curiosity had sealed her fate. The cold dread that had settled in my bones now turned to icy resolve. Lily's journal was the final piece of evidence, undeniable proof that the town's prosperity was built on a foundation of unspeakable horror. The real monsters weren't lurking in the shadows. They were the silence, the fear, and the forgotten choices of an entire town. Tonight, Willow Creek would face its past. The silence would be broken, and the lake would either claim another soul or finally be freed from its ancient, blood-stained hunger. The chilling final entry in Lily's journal, "The mirror showed me a secret," was the catalyst. It cemented the agonizing truth of her fate and underscored the immense power of the entity, tied not just to the lake, but to the complicit silence of the entire town. Mark and I knew then what we had to do. We couldn't just run and we couldn't just hide. To break the cycle, to truly free Willow Creek and honor the lost, we had to expose everything. And we had to do it publicly, unequivocally, so that the collective fear and guilt that fed the entity could finally be shattered. Our desperate plan hinged on Willow Creek's annual Founders' Day ceremony. It was the one event every year that brought nearly the entire town together, a gathering meant to celebrate their prosperity and resilience, a prosperity we now knew bought with innocent lives. The ceremony was traditionally held in the old town hall, a crumbling, majestic building at the heart of the village, where, as Old Man Hemlock had revealed, the central mirror was located. It was the perfect, terrifying stage. We spent the next few days in a frantic race against time, operating under the ever-present threat of the entity's increasing aggression. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow stretching across the street, felt like a watchful eye. We meticulously gathered our evidence: the tarnished silver locket, now a heavy talisman of truth, Lily's journal, its innocent pages a damning testament, and Mark's historical findings, carefully cross-referenced notes from Elias Thorne's chilling journal and the meticulously catalogued town council minutes. We bundled everything together, a collection of undeniable proof, ready to be laid bare. The day of the Founders' Day ceremony arrived, thick with a false sense of cheer. The town hall buzzed with nervous energy, the air heavy with anticipation for speeches and old traditions. Mark and I positioned ourselves near the back, our hearts hammering, the weight of our impending actions pressing down on us. The central mirror, an enormous, ornate antique, hung proudly above the stage, its surface dark and reflective, a silent witness to generations of deceit. As Mayor Thompson, no relation thankfully, droned on about Willow Creek's enduring spirit, I felt a sudden, profound calm settle over me, born from a place of absolute resolve. This was for Lily. This was for Sarah. This was for all the forgotten tributes. When the mayor concluded, a hushed expectation fell over the crowd. Instead of the usual town elders stepping forward, I walked purposefully towards the stage, Lily's journal clutched in my hand, the locket burning against my chest. A ripple of confusion spread through the audience. Mark stood firm at the back, his gaze fixed on me, a silent pillar of support. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs, amplified by the unexpected silence. "My name is Alara Thompson, and I have something Willow Creek needs to hear." I didn't mince words. I started by holding up the locket, recounting how I found it, and then the newspaper clipping about Sarah Miller. I revealed the dark, insidious history we had uncovered, the pact forged by their ancestors during the Blight, the horrific truth of the disappearances as tributes, the use of the mirrors, and the chilling patterns spanning generations. I laid bare the town's complicity, the silence that allowed the horror to fester. Initial disbelief rippled through the hall, quickly followed by a furious murmur of anger and outrage, particularly from the descendants of the original founders, whose faces flushed with indignation and fear. "Blasphemy!" someone shouted. "She's mad with grief," another cried. But I pressed on, my voice gaining strength, fueled by the righteous anger that had been simmering within me. I read passages from Thorne's journal, the desperate words of the founders detailing their monstrous bargain. As my words, raw and unvarnished, continued to expose the horrifying truth, the air in the town hall grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure. The overhead lights began to flicker, erratically at first, then violently, casting dancing shadows that writhed across the walls. A low, guttural moan seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the building. And then, the central mirror above the stage, the entity's focal point, began to ripple. Not a distortion of light, but a physical undulation, as if water were trapped beneath its glass surface. Within its depths, distorted reflections began to form, swirling into grotesque, ethereal visages. I saw Sarah Miller, her face contorted in silent anguish. And then, horrifyingly, Lily, her youthful features twisted into a mask of pure terror. They were the missing, their spectral images rising from the depths of the mirror, their silent screams filling the hall. The air grew icy cold, and a palpable wave of fear swept through the crowd, silencing their protests. The entity was manifesting, no longer content with subtle threats. A dark, ethereal presence coalesced in front of the mirror, a shifting mass of shadow and despair, its form vaguely humanoid but constantly dissolving and reforming. It reached out, tendrils of darkness stretching towards me, attempting to silence my voice, to crush me with its ancient dread. A piercing shriek, not of sound but of pure psychic agony, filled the hall, causing panic to erupt. People screamed, pushing and shoving, desperate to escape the manifesting horror. But just as the entity lunged, a booming, guttural shout cut through the chaos. "The mirror! Break the mirror! It's the eye! The connection!" It was Old Man Hemlock, his eyes wide with terror but his voice newfound courage, pointing a trembling, defiant finger at the immense glass. He was no longer a frightened recluse. He was a guide, shouting details of the ritual, of how the connection was maintained, his long-held fear finally overcome by the immediate, overwhelming threat. Mark, who had sprinted forward from the back of the hall, grabbed a heavy brass fire extinguisher from the wall. Without hesitation, guided by Hemlock's desperate cries, he swung it with all his might, aiming directly for the center of the shimmering, rippling glass. The impact was deafening. The central mirror exploded inwards with a deafening shatter, sending countless fragments of glass showering across the stage like frozen tears. A piercing, guttural, ancient scream, a sound that felt as if it tore through the very fabric of existence, ripped through the hall. The dark, ethereal manifestation recoiled, convulsing violently as if mortally wounded, its form flickering and shrinking, before finally dissipating into nothingness, leaving behind only an unbearable chill and the acrid smell of ozone. Silence, profound and absolute, descended upon the shattered hall. The flickering lights stabilized. The screams died down to whimpers. The air still vibrated with the echoes of ancient horror, but the crushing presence was gone. The pact broken. The connection severed. A stunned, ringing silence descended upon the shattered town hall, heavy with the dust of broken glass and the lingering chill of something ancient and malevolent. The raw screams had died into ragged gasps, and the panicked shoving had frozen into motionless shock. Every face in the room was a canvas of disbelief, horror, and a dawning, terrible understanding. The illusion Willow Creek had clung to for generations, the comforting lie that their prosperity was simply a blessing, was utterly, irrevocably broken. Then, as the immediate terror began to recede, a cacophony of new emotions erupted. There was profound horror at the visual proof of what had just transpired. The phantom images in the shattered mirror still burned into their minds. But woven into that horror was a thread of visceral relief. The suffocating presence was gone, the crushing weight of an unseen threat lifted. And with it, a simmering, confused anger. Anger at the founders who had made such a monstrous bargain, anger at the generations who had kept the secret, and anger, perhaps, at themselves for their complicity, for their silence. Murmurs began, growing louder as neighbors looked at neighbors, their eyes holding accusations, fear, and a desperate plea for answers. Suddenly, the wail of sirens cut through the fragile quiet outside. I had, as a last desperate precaution, made an anonymous call to the state police, citing unrest and potential public disturbance at the Founders' Day ceremony, hoping it would be enough to bring outside help. Now, cruisers swarmed into the town square, their blue and red lights flashing frantically against the darkening sky. Officers, their faces grim and professional, stormed into the town hall, their hands on their holsters, clearly ready for a full-blown riot. They took in the shattered mirror, the disoriented crowd, the lingering scent of ozone, and the sheer, palpable terror in the air. An officer, presumably the lead, approached me cautiously. His eyes, though assessing, held a flicker of something that suggested he'd seen things that defied explanation. I offered what little coherence I could muster, pointing to Mark and Old Man Hemlock, who stood trembling but resolute. Mark, his voice shaking but clear, quickly explained that we had uncovered evidence of a historical local issue that had culminated in a mass hysteria event and property damage, careful not to dive into the supernatural for now. The police began to interview witnesses, though it was clear their statements were chaotic, filled with conflicting descriptions of what had just transpired. How do you explain a spectral entity to a police officer trained in logic and procedure? As the night wore on, the truth, in its brutal, undeniable form, began to sink into Willow Creek. The initial shock gave way to a wave of collective grief for the lost, not just Lily and Sarah Miller, but for all the unnamed souls whose disappearances had been swept under the rug of the pact. This grief was now inextricably mixed with profound shame. Generations of fear had blinded them, had turned them into unwitting accomplices in a horrific ritual. The community, once outwardly harmonious, was now fractured by guilt, accusation, and the raw pain of betrayal. There was a desperate, urgent need for reckoning, a demand for accountability that stretched back through time. Families whispered about their ancestors, examining their own lineage for the stain of complicity. The entity was banished, its scream marking its forced retreat. The immediate cycle of tributes had ended. The suffocating grip of its ancient hunger was broken. Willow Creek was no longer under its direct thrall. But the peace that followed was not one of simple calm. It was the quiet after a devastating storm, filled with the wreckage of shattered illusions. The town faced an incredibly long road to healing. It wouldn't be easy. Generations of buried secrets don't simply disappear with a broken mirror. There would be investigations, accusations, a desperate search for true justice beyond the supernatural. And Willow Creek would have to learn to live with its horrifying past, to integrate it into its identity, and to somehow forge a future built on truth, not terrifying silence. Willow Creek learned a harsh truth that day, that silence, born of fear or convenience, can be a pact with darkness. The past isn't just something that happened, it's a living echo that demands to be heard, to be confronted. Only then can true healing begin. The days and weeks that followed the Founders' Day ceremony were tumultuous for Willow Creek. The shattered mirror in the town hall became a stark monument, a physical representation of the town's broken illusion. News of the incident, distorted and sensationalized, reached beyond the valley, bringing in curious reporters and a more thorough police investigation than Willow Creek had ever seen. The whispers, once confined to fearful glances, now erupted into heated arguments, accusations, and heartbreaking confessions as families grappled with their inherited guilt and the horrific truth of their town's prosperity. It was ugly, messy, and absolutely necessary. For me, Ilara, the overwhelming grief I had carried for Lily finally shifted. It hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. Knowing the truth, understanding that Lily wasn't just lost but had been tragically caught in an ancient, insidious pattern, allowed a space for genuine mourning to begin. The anger at the town was still there, but it was now tempered by a profound sadness for their shared burden, a recognition that many were victims of fear as much as perpetrators of silence. Surprisingly, I found myself choosing to stay in Willow Creek. Not to forget, that would be impossible, but to help. To ensure the cycle truly ended. I opened a small art studio, creating pieces that for the first time, truly reflected my experiences, my art becoming a quiet testament to the town's struggle and eventual healing. I joined nascent community groups dedicated to historical transparency and support for the families of the long-lost. It was a long road, but one I felt compelled to walk for Lily, and for the Willow Creek that could still be. Mark, my steadfast friend, dove headfirst into the historical reckoning. The guilt he initially felt had solidified into an unshakable dedication. He meticulously compiled all our findings, tirelessly writing a comprehensive account of the pact, the disappearances, and the town's complicity. He lobbied the town council, pushing for public memorials, for educational programs, ensuring that the true history of Willow Creek would never be forgotten. His antique shop, once a repository of forgotten trinkets, became a hub of information, a place where people could come to learn, to question, and to finally understand. He became the town's reluctant chronicler, bearing witness to its painful truth. And then there was Old Man Hemlock. In the immediate aftermath, he had seemed to shrink, fading further into his reclusive existence. But with the shattering of the mirror, the entity's grip on him had broken too. The constant, gnawing paranoia began to recede. He started making tentative visits to the town, sitting on a bench in the square, watching the people. His eyes, once clouded with terror, now held a quiet, melancholic peace. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with a newfound clarity, sharing fragments of memories, details that helped fill in the gaps. He was no longer a madman, but a survivor, finally freed from a lifetime of unspoken horror. This story reminds us that even in the most beautiful places, shadows can linger, especially when secrets are kept. What stories do you think your own town might be hiding? Share your thoughts below. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest courage is found in shattering the oldest reflections. This story reminds us that even in the most beautiful places, shadows can linger, especially when secrets are kept. Willow Creek learned that the hard way, its idyllic facade finally giving way to the truth buried beneath generations of silence. It's a powerful lesson, isn't it? That the past isn't just something confined to dusty archives. It's a living, breathing force shaping our present and demanding to be acknowledged. Only by confronting those forgotten choices, those uncomfortable truths, can any real healing begin. So, as you settle deeper into the quiet of your own space, take a moment to consider. What stories do you think your own town might be hiding? What secrets, perhaps whispered only in hushed tones, might be shaping the very air you breathe? Sometimes the most profound mysteries aren't in distant, fantastical realms, but in the familiar streets and silent histories right outside your window. Thank you for listening tonight, for joining me on this journey into the unsettling heart of Willow Creek. Remember, sometimes the greatest courage is found not in fighting monsters, but in shattering the oldest reflections, the ones that hide the truth.